Story 1. The Disappearance at Crestwood Morgue. It was a frigid, silent night in the quiet town of Crestwood. The county morgue sat on the outskirts, a low, gray building bordered by a sagging chain-link fence. Inside, the air carried a constant chill, a mix of the refrigeration unit's hum and the somber stillness that pervaded the place. Ethan Carter had manned the night shift for 4 years. A photo of his wife Lily smiled from his desk, her warmth a stark contrast to the clinical environment. He'd called her earlier, promising to bring home breakfast after his shift. Every evening at 10 he'd arrive, brew strong coffee, and settle into his routine, cataloging inventory, completing paperwork, and preparing for the morning crew. Tonight began like any other. Ethan sipped his coffee as he glanced at the clock. 2:30. Rachel, the morning attendant, would arrive at 6. She'd texted earlier, checking if he needed anything, a small kindness that made the lonely nights more bearable. He paused at a recent arrivals file. Eleanor Winters, 67, found in her home 3 days ago. Cause of death, heart failure. A note from the coroner mentioned, patient exhibited unusual post-mortem muscle contractions. Ethan frowned, then shrugged it off. A sudden noise broke his focus, a muted thud. He froze, ears straining. The morgue fell silent once more. "Just the pipes," he muttered. Still, he decided to take a quick walk through. His footsteps echoed down the narrow hall as he checked each room. The autopsy tools lay in perfect order. The storage area, with its rows of metal drawers, seemed undisturbed, locked, secure. Satisfied, he returned to his desk, tension easing from his shoulders. For the next hour, work proceeded normally. He was nearly caught up when the lights flickered violently, then stabilized. Ethan glanced up, annoyed rather than alarmed. The building's electrical system had been problematic for weeks. His phone buzzed, a text from Lily. "Can't sleep, miss you." He smiled, typing back, "Just a few more hours. Sweet dreams." As he set the phone down, a soft sound drifted from the hallway, like someone humming a melody. Ethan stood, peering out his office door. "Hello?" The humming stopped abruptly. Could someone have broken in? He grabbed the security baton from his desk drawer and stepped cautiously into the hallway. Empty. He checked each room methodically, finding nothing out of place. Perhaps he'd imagined it, fatigue playing tricks on his mind. Back at his desk, relief washed over him. He poured another cup of coffee, determined to stay alert. The clock read 3:45. The lights flickered again, longer this time. When they stabilized, Ethan noticed something odd, a small puddle near the door. He knelt to inspect it, realizing it wasn't water, but condensation, as if something ice-cold had rested there momentarily. Standing, he felt a sudden weight behind him, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. He whirled around. Nothing. Yet the feeling persisted, crawling across his skin like invisible fingers. He grabbed his phone, dialing Rachel. It rang twice before hitting voicemail. "Rachel, it's Ethan. Something feels off here. Can you come early, please?" His voice wavered as he hung up. He tried to settle, turning on every light in his vicinity. For a while, nothing happened. The quiet returned, steady and unremarkable. Ethan began to relax, chuckling at his own paranoia. He'd been working too many consecutive nights. That had to be it. At 4:50, just as he'd convinced himself everything was fine, a sharp bang echoed from the storage room, like a metal drawer slamming shut. Logic told him to ignore it, to wait for Rachel, but something pulled him toward the sound, a curiosity he couldn't suppress. The storage room door stood ajar. Inside, the lights buzzed erratically, casting the room in strobing flashes. In those stuttering glimpses, Ethan saw it. Drawer 237 was open, its body bag crumpled on the floor. Empty. His stomach dropped. Had someone tampered with it? He approached cautiously, examining the lock. No signs of forced entry. The tag showed a name he didn't recognize. He recalled the coroner's note about Eleanor. Unusual post-mortem muscle contractions. The temperature plummeted suddenly, his breath visible in white puffs. The light stabilized, revealing frost forming along the edges of the metal drawers. A soft humming returned, the same melody he'd heard earlier, coming from the darkened corner behind him. Ethan turned slowly. In the shadows stood a figure, vague, indistinct, but unmistakably human-shaped. Not menacing, but waiting. The humming stopped. "Who's there?" Ethan's voice cracked. The figure didn't respond. He took a tentative step forward. As he drew closer, he could make out more details. The outline of an elderly woman in a hospital gown, her edges blurred and shifting. Eleanor? His rational mind rejected the impossibility, even as his eyes confirmed it. The figure raised a hand, pointing not at him, but past him, toward drawer 108. Ethan hesitated, then turned to look. Drawer 108 was supposedly empty. Against all reason, he moved toward it, pulled by an invisible force. His hands shook as he gripped the handle. Locked. He fumbled for his keys, finding the master. The lock clicked open, the drawer sliding out smoothly. Inside lay not a body, but a small wooden box, ornately carved with strange symbols. It didn't belong here. He lifted it, surprisingly heavy for its size. The humming resumed, louder now, more insistent. The figure had drawn closer, its form more defined. Not threatening, but urgent, desperate. Ethan looked from the box to the figure, understanding dawning. "You want this," he whispered. The humming intensified. The lights began to flicker violently, the temperature dropping to painful levels. Frost crept across the floor toward him. Ethan backed away, clutching the box. Fight or flight instincts kicked in. He ran. Through the hallway he sprinted, the humming chasing him, growing distorted, angry. At the front door, his trembling hands fought with the lock. It clicked open just as the lights died completely. In that pitch darkness, something cold brushed his neck. He burst outside, gasping the night air. Behind him, the morgue stood silent, dark. Looking at the box in his hands, a decision formed. He needed to understand what this was. Placing the box in his car, he returned for his belongings. The moment he stepped back inside, the door slammed shut. The humming transformed into a low, inhuman growl. The darkness thickened, became tangible. Something moved within it, not Eleanor, but something else, something that had been waiting. Ethan fumbled for the door handle, finding nothing but smooth wall. The darkness pressed closer, suffocating. A pair of eyes opened within it, ancient, burning with malevolence. The growl formed words. "The key returns to us." He was yanked backward, swallowed by the darkness. When Rachel arrived at 6, the morgue was unnervingly still. Ethan's car sat in the lot, lights still on inside, but no sound greeted her. "Ethan?" she called. Silence answered. In his office, his coat draped the chair, his phone lay beside a spilled mug, coffee still lukewarm, but Ethan was gone. His file cabinet stood open, drawer 108's key missing from the ring. Alarmed, she searched every corner. The storage room remained orderly, all drawers sealed. No trace of Ethan. She dialed the police, who arrived within the hour. They checked the cameras. Nothing. The footage showed Ethan working normally until 4:50, when he went to investigate a noise. He entered the storage room, then the feed cut to static, resuming at 6 with an empty morgue. Lily was devastated by her husband's disappearance. Days stretched into weeks, then months, with no leads. Theories circulated: a breakdown, an elaborate disappearance, foul play. Yet his car, wallet, and life remained behind. 3 months later, renovations revealed a hidden sub-basement, sealed for decades. Inside, workers found ancient containment units and journals detailing entities that required guardians. The last entry, dated 1956, mentioned drawer 108 and a box that must never be disturbed. The Crestwood Morgue carried on, but night shifts were now staffed in pairs. Workers reported odd drafts, fleeting shadows, a lingering unease. On the stillest nights, some claim to hear a faint voice warning, "Leave the keys where they lie." When Rachel took over as head attendant, she instituted a new policy. Drawer 108 remained empty, permanently locked, its key destroyed. No one questioned why. And if she sometimes left a fresh cup of coffee at the night desk for a colleague long gone, some habits die hard, harder than people. Story 2. The Vanished Pulse. In the small town of Greystone, nestled among rolling hills, the morning dawned cold and gray. Rain pounded the roof of the county morgue, a weathered building where silence held weight. Inside, beneath flickering fluorescent lights, the air hung thick with formaldehyde and something else, faint but deeply unsettling. Officer Michael Reed wiped raindrops from his badge as he entered. 20 years on the force had hardened him to grim sights, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The gold band on his finger caught the light as he removed his coat. His wife Sarah had called him twice already, wondering when he'd be home for dinner. That would have to wait. "Thanks for coming so quickly," Dr. Lillian Crow greeted him, her typically composed demeanor fractured. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, her silver-streaked hair pulled back severely. "I've never seen anything like this in my 15 years here." On a steel table lay a man's body, logged as John Smith, found 3 days earlier by the roadside, no identification, no apparent trauma. Initial assessment, natural causes. "What am I looking at, Lillian?" Michael asked, approaching cautiously. The coroner's latex-gloved finger hovered over the open chest cavity. "This is what's wrong. Look closely." Michael leaned in, his breath catching. The chest had been opened with surgical precision, skin parted cleanly, ribs retracted with expert care. But where the heart should have rested, nothing, an empty cavity, meticulously hollowed. "We didn't do this," Lillian whispered, her voice tight. "The body came to us intact. I performed the external examination myself yesterday evening. This happened overnight." Michael's mind raced. The morgue's security was respectable, keypad entry, cameras, night guard. Yet someone had slipped in unseen, performed this bizarre act, and vanished without trace. "Why?" he asked, the question hanging in the cold air. "What's the point of stealing a dead man's heart?" Lillian shook her head. "I checked the other 5 bodies. All untouched. Just him." She pointed to strange markings around the incision, tiny symbols etched into the skin. "And look at these cuts. This is professional work. Someone with medical training." A chill crawled down Michael's spine. He pictured a shadowy figure hunched over the body, scalpel in hand, working with terrifying efficiency. This wasn't random vandalism or a prank. There was purpose here, dark and incomprehensible. "Security footage," he said, straightening. "Now." The security room was cramped, monitors casting blue light on their faces. Lillian pulled up the previous night's recording. The timestamp showed 1:55 a.m., empty hallway, dim emergency lights. At exactly 2, the feed cut out. Black screen for 40 minutes, then resumed with the same empty hallway. "Coincidence?" Michael muttered, though he already knew better. "Whoever did this knew our systems," Lillian replied. "The night guard, Thomas, swears he heard nothing. He was doing his rounds at the time." Michael ran a hand through his graying hair. "Who has access to this place after hours?" "Just 5 people, including myself. Thomas, our 2 techs, and the cleaning staff." Through the next 3 days, Michael interviewed each person. Thomas, a former security guard at the local mall, seemed genuinely shaken. The techs, Jamie and Eli, appeared confused and spooked. The cleaner, Mrs. Dempsey, hadn't been in that night. No one seemed guilty, but Reed had interviewed enough suspects to know that truth hides behind ordinary faces. On the 4th night, a storm lashed Greystone. Michael sat in his home office, photos of the body spread before him. Sarah brought him coffee, her eyes worried. "This case is different," he admitted to her. "Something feels wrong." John Smith remained a mystery. No fingerprint matches, no missing persons report. Preliminary tests suggested heart failure, which struck Michael as grimly ironic. The heart that failed him had been stolen. His phone rang just after midnight. Lillian's voice came through, fractured with panic. "Michael, get over here, it's happened again." Rain pelted him as he rushed to the morgue. On the table lay a woman in her 30s, Kelly Matthews, victim of a car crash 2 days prior. Her chest was opened, heart missing, all with that same eerie precision. Around the wound, the same strange markings, this time more elaborate. "I don't understand," Lillian whispered. "We installed new cameras. Thomas was watching the monitor room all night. Nobody came in." Michael studied the body, noticing something he'd missed before. The skin around the incision had a faint bluish tint, like bruising, but different, almost as if something had been drawn out through the pores. "This isn't normal," he muttered, "and it's not over." He ordered round-the-clock guards and set up his own cameras, ones that couldn't be tampered with easily. As he finished, the lights in the morgue flickered momentarily. A cold draft whispered through the halls, carrying what sounded like distant rhythmic breathing. That night, driving home, Michael couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The rain-slick roads reflected his headlights, but beyond that circle of illumination, the darkness felt alive, waiting, watching. Sarah was asleep when he arrived. He moved quietly to avoid waking her, but as he passed their bedroom mirror, he froze. For just a moment, he thought he saw something behind him. A tall shadow, motionless. When he turned, the hallway was empty. The next morning brought no answers. The new cameras showed nothing unusual, except for one inexplicable 3-minute gap at 3:15 a.m. The guards reported nothing, though one mentioned feeling unusually cold at that exact time. By the 7th day, Michael was running on coffee and determination. He'd pinned photos and notes across his office wall, connecting threads that seemed to lead nowhere. Then, while reviewing old morgue records, he noticed something. 6 months ago, another body had been found by the roadside. Same lack of ID, same suspected heart failure. No autopsy had been performed. The body was cremated after 30 days. "It's been happening longer than we thought," he told Lillian over the phone. "We need to—" Her scream cut him off. Michael raced to the morgue, heart pounding. He found Lillian in the supply closet, backed against the wall, pointing at the floor. Before her lay a small wooden box, intricately carved with the same symbols from the bodies. Inside, cushioned on red velvet, sat a human heart, desiccated, blackened, but unmistakable. "It wasn't here an hour ago," she whispered. "I was alone in the building." Michael crouched beside the box, noting the strange, sweet scent emanating from it. The heart looked ancient, yet somehow alive. As he stared, he could have sworn he saw it pulse once, very faintly. That night, he didn't go home. He sat in his car across from the morgue, watching. The rain had stopped, but thick fog rolled through the streets, obscuring everything beyond 20 feet. At precisely 3:15, the lights in the morgue flickered. Without hesitation, Michael moved. Gun drawn, he entered through the back door. The hallway stretched before him, fog somehow seeping through the ventilation system, forming tendrils along the floor. From the examination room came a soft, rhythmic sound, like a heartbeat, but slower, more deliberate. As he approached, the sound grew louder. The door stood ajar, a blue light spilling through the gap. Michael steeled himself and pushed it open. What he saw defied explanation. A figure stood over John Smith's body, tall, unnaturally thin, draped in dark clothing that seemed to absorb light. Its hands moved with impossible fluidity over the corpse. The blue light emanated not from any lamp, but from the body itself, pulsing with each movement of those long fingers. Michael raised his gun. "Police! Don't move!" The figure turned, slowly, deliberately. Where a face should have been, there was only a smooth, featureless expanse, like skin stretched over bone. It tilted its head, studying him with an air of curiosity rather than fear. "What are you?" Michael whispered. The figure didn't speak. Instead, it raised one hand, palm up. In it rested a heart, not the blackened one from the box, but fresh, glistening. It pulsed once, twice, impossibly alive. The lights flickered again. When they stabilized, the figure was gone. The body on the table remained, chest still open, but something had changed. Michael approached cautiously, peering into the cavity. The heart had been returned, not just placed back, but somehow reattached, blood vessels reconnected with impossible precision. As he watched, stunned, the organ gave a single powerful beat. John Smith's eyes snapped open. When the morning shift arrived, they found Officer Michael Reed slumped in a chair, staring at an empty examination table. The body of John Smith was gone, no paperwork, no record of release. The security footage showed nothing but empty rooms all night. Michael couldn't explain what had happened. His report mentioned only a break-in and a missing body. The case remained open but inactive, filed away among Greystone's unsolved mysteries. But on quiet nights, in the small apartment he moved to after Sarah left, unable to live with a man who'd changed so fundamentally, Michael sits awake, listening. Sometimes he swears he can hear it, a heartbeat, not his own, pulsing in perfect synchrony with his breathing. And in the mirror, just at the edge of vision, a tall shadow watches, waiting. In Greystone, the rain still falls, the morgue still stands, and sometimes the dead don't stay as they should. Story 3. The Shadow Double. Michael Bennett awoke to a typical suburban morning. Sunlight, fractured by the Venetian blinds, striped across the kitchen where he sat with Emily, his wife. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, a comforting scent against the backdrop of another ordinary day. Emily smiled, her brown hair catching the golden light as she raised her ceramic mug. "Big day at the office?" she asked. "Just the usual grind," Michael replied, adjusting the knot of his tie. "Meetings, emails, the endless spreadsheet battle." He leaned over and kissed her goodbye. The taste of coffee and her familiar perfume, a small, grounding comfort. The drive downtown was uneventful, a gray blur of traffic and billboards. His office building, a towering monolith of glass and steel, hummed with the low-level anxiety of deadlines and corporate pressures. Michael navigated the day in a familiar routine, answering phone calls, attending meetings, and grabbing a hastily eaten sandwich at his desk. Nothing foreshadowed the bizarre and terrifying event about to disrupt his reality. Around noon, his cell phone vibrated on his desk. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen. Assuming it was a telemarketer or some mundane call, he hesitated, then answered. A voice, heavy with somber professionalism, sliced through the airwaves. "Mr. Bennett, this is Mercy Hospital. We need you to come down here, immediately. It's of the utmost urgency." Michael frowned, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. "What is this regarding?" The voice paused, a beat of unsettling silence before it continued. "It's about your body, sir. Please, just come as soon as you can." "My body?" Michael's laugh was sharp, edged with disbelief. "I'm talking to you right now. I assure you I'm perfectly fine." "We will explain everything when you arrive," the voice insisted, its tone unwavering. "Please, sir, come as quickly as possible." Confusion morphed into a creeping dread. There was something in the unwavering seriousness of the voice that compelled him to obey. He snatched his car keys from his desk and raced towards the parking garage, his mind a chaotic storm of questions. Was this some kind of elaborate prank? A case of mistaken identity? The hospital loomed ahead, a cold, sterile structure that seemed to exude an aura of impending doom. A harried-looking nurse quickly ushered him towards the basement. The morgue, the very word felt like a death knell. An attendant, clad in a pale green uniform, stood beside a stainless steel table. A white sheet was draped over a human shape beneath, causing Michael's stomach to churn with mounting anxiety. "Mr. Bennett," the man said, his voice hushed and somber, "we discovered this body this morning. The identification on the deceased indicates it is you." He slowly pulled back the sheet. Michael froze, every muscle in his body locking up. Staring back at him chillingly was himself. The same dark hair, the same faint, barely noticeable scar on his chin from a childhood fall, the same hazel eyes that had always reflected his own soul. Except these eyes were lifeless, vacant, staring blankly at the ceiling. A wave of nausea washed over him, and his knees threatened to buckle beneath him. "That's impossible," he whispered, the words barely audible. Footsteps echoed in the stark, tiled room. Emily rushed in, her face ashen with shock. "Michael, they called me too. What in God's name is happening?" "I don't know, Em," he said, his voice trembling with disbelief. That is me, but I'm right here. I'm alive." The attendant shifted uncomfortably, avoiding direct eye contact. The body was found in a downtown alleyway early this morning. There were no obvious signs of trauma, no indication of foul play, just deceased. The wallet contained your driver's license, your credit cards, everything that identified him as Michael Bennett. Emily reached out a trembling hand, her fingers brushing against the cold, still hand on the table. "It's real," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "It's really dead." Michael's chest constricted. "Then, who am I?" The question hung in the sterile air, heavy with dread. No one had an answer. The attendant mumbled something about running further tests, but Michael barely registered the words. His cell phone rang again. It was David, his close friend. His voice was frantic. "Mike, what is this I am hearing about you being at the hospital?" "It's absolute madness, Dave," Michael said, trying to explain the inexplicable situation. "There's a dead body here that looks exactly like me. It's a perfect double." David arrived 20 minutes later, his jaw visibly slackening as he took in the scene. "That's you, man. Exactly you. This is seriously messed up, Mike." The three of them stood there, a tableau of shock, horror, and utter disbelief. Michael's mind raced, desperately seeking any semblance of an explanation. What if it's some sort of clone, some experimental government project? Emily shook her head, a flicker of fear in her eyes. "That's science fiction, Michael, not reality." "Or a doppelganger," David said quietly, a strange unease settling over him. "You know the old stories. Seeing your double is an omen, a sign of impending doom." Michael had heard the legends of doppelgangers. They weren't just lookalikes. They were sinister harbingers of misfortune, shadow selves connected to fate, or worse. The very idea sent a shiver down his spine, more profound than the morgue's frigid air. Days bled into weeks, and the mystery only deepened. The tests confirmed the impossible. The corpse possessed Michael's fingerprints, his DNA, everything. Reporters descended upon the town, transforming the bizarre story into a national sensation. "Man confronts his own corpse," the sensationalist headlines screamed. But no scientist, no medical expert could provide a rational explanation. The body was eventually buried in a quiet, somber ceremony that Michael couldn't bring himself to attend. Life, however, did not return to normal. Every night he'd lie awake in bed. The image of his lifeless double burned into his mind. He began to notice subtle, yet disturbing discrepancies. His reflection in the mirror seemed off somehow. His memories felt strangely blurred around the edges, like faded photographs. Had he always been this way, or was this some new, terrifying reality? Emily noticed the change in him as well. "You're not yourself, Michael," she said one evening, her voice laced with worry. "You need to seek help." He reluctantly agreed to see a therapist, a kind and understanding woman who listened patiently to his increasingly bizarre account. "This is truly beyond anything I've studied in my professional career," she admitted, her brow furrowed. "You're grappling with something that defies definition, something truly inexplicable." The nightmares began shortly thereafter. In his dreams, he'd see the other Michael, alive, always lurking in the shadows, watching him from dark corners. Sometimes the shadowy figure spoke, its voice like nails dragging across a chalkboard. "I'm the real one," it would whisper, the words echoing inside his skull like a death knell. "You have stolen my life." Michael would wake up drenched in cold sweat, his heart pounding wildly in his chest. He began to distrust mirrors, actively avoiding his own gaze. At work, his colleagues whispered behind his back, casting furtive glances. Friends asked too many probing questions, their concerned expressions laced with thinly veiled fear. The world felt like it was closing in around him, suffocating him. One stormy night, he heard a floorboard creak downstairs. Emily was sleeping soundly beside him, oblivious to the growing dread that gripped him. Quietly slipping out of bed, he grabbed a flashlight from the nightstand and crept down the stairs, the beam of light trembling in his hand. In the living room, a shadow shifted in the darkness. He swung the flashlight around, and there it was. Him, the other Michael, standing motionless by the window, the torrential rain streaking down the glass behind him. "Who are you?" Michael demanded, his voice cracking with a mixture of terror and desperation. The figure smiled, a slow, knowing curve of his lips that sent a wave of nausea through Michael. "I am you, the real you." "But you're dead," Michael stammered. "I saw you lying in the morgue. I saw you dead." "Am I?" The other Michael stepped closer, his eyes glinting with an unnerving light. "Or are you the ghost here?" Michael stumbled backwards, colliding with a nearby table. "I'm alive. I have a wife, a job, a life." "My wife," the figure cut in, the venom dripping from his voice. "My job, my life. You are nothing but the echo." The room spun around him. Was it true? Had he been the doppelganger all along, a mere copy living a borrowed existence? The other Michael reached out a hand, his cold fingers brushing against Michael's arm. A jolt of pure, icy energy shot through his body. Cold, electric, and then, as quickly as it appeared, the figure vanished. Michael stood alone in the living room, the storm raging outside, mirroring the turmoil within his soul. He never saw the other Michael again, but the terrifying encounter left an indelible mark on his psyche. He grew quieter, more withdrawn, forever plagued by the same agonizing question: was he the original or merely a shadow? Every reflection in the mirror, every curious glance from a stranger, held the weight of that unanswered question. The chilling tale of Michael Bennett and his doppelganger spread throughout the town, whispered like a terrifying ghost story around crackling campfires. No one ever solved the bizarre riddle of the body in the morgue. For Michael, it was more than just an unsolved mystery. It became a haunting, an unhealable crack in the mirror of his soul that would forever shatter his sense of self.